Looks like we have some characters today. We've got a penguin, a dinosaur, and what is that? Looks like a CryptoPunk, but I'm Andy. I am the co-founder of the Rollup. We do a lot of media and education around like modular blockchains and scaling and these types of things. Today we have AltVMs versus EVM with David, Dino, Rahat, and Dima. So come chill and let's have some fun.
He's on?
Yeah.
What up?
What's going on? All right, so let's do some quick intros. Start with you, Dima, and then we'll go down the line.
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Dima, co-founder of LayerN, building the most powerful blockchain out there.
Dino, one of the co-founders of Fluent, and we're building the first splendid execution network.
Hey, I'm David Mihal from Fuel Labs, and we are building a operating system for high-performance rollups on Ethereum.
Hey, I'm Rahat, DevRel over at Movement Labs, and we're building the first move-based VM chain on Ethereum.
Awesome. I think we're also pretty familiar with the kind of next-gen VM or AltVM versus EVM conversation. We've been having a lot on the rollup for the last 6 months, and I just kind of like would like to understand from your perspective. Actually, this is kind of like a meta question. What do you guys want to get out of this conversation? Like, what will make this conversation productive for you guys? This is if there's anything in particular that comes to mind. If not, I can move into the actual questions. But like,
hot takes. I don't know.
Okay.
Trying to float some.
Maybe just like the trade-offs, like the actual trade-offs in that design space of like choosing EVM versus different types of like AltVMs.
Okay, cool. Well, that's great. My first question is aligned with that. It's kind of understanding the pros and cons of the EVM. I think is a really good place to start for this conversation, so we can kind of build a foundation from that. So, yeah, in the world of execution, why has the EVM been kind of the leader, and what are some of the downsides of the EVM as we know it today?
I mean, network effects, I think, is always the reason the EVM is so dominant. This is something we always see in software is the best technology is almost rarely like the most popular technology. It's why everything is built with JavaScript. It's why, we've talked a bunch before about like PHP was, had its time as like the dominant technology. Today, if you want to build an application, I still think if you can build something on the EVM, you probably should, because it's got a lot of good tooling. It's got a lot of great security ecosystem. We're getting pretty decent scale with it. So I think if you can do something with EVM, you probably should. But I think what we're hoping, what I think a lot of us on stage here are hoping, is that we can enable a whole bunch of new types of applications that weren't possible with the EVM.
Yeah, similar like thread, just to build on that. I kind of think about it as like the EVM has, like I put all that in the bucket of like almost like go-to-market benefits or like ecosystem benefits, because like through the lens of like a dev, like what are you trying to do? Like, yes, you're looking at different technical attributes, but you're also building a startup, and like sometimes it just like you can iterate faster when there's like a lot more like building blocks to just pick off the shelf, when there's like integrations out of the box, when you could type something in a ChatGPT and just get an answer, and like those are like much more like efficient processes than like having to like find the one dev on the one new EVM, the AltVM team. So like there's clearly like go-to-market benefits for the EVM, even though like it also has technical limitations, and those are all like there's a lot of valid criticisms technically. But those go-to-market things are important. Like these are startups too. So I mean, but it's just kind of offering more color on the network effects that he was talking about, really.
Yeah, I think piggybacking off of what they both said, it's like if you want to build something quick, fast, with a lot of like community support, whatever, sure, go on the EVM. But if you want to build something a little bit better, go a little bit beyond like what's capable right now, you got to venture out a little bit, which will be harder. Less devs, I guess, in the arena. So you'll have a challenge of just like onboarding new folks onto whatever tech you have, which is, I guess, what some of us are doing here.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure much in agreement with everyone. I think like we all recognize here is that like, okay, if you're building something new, it will be much harder to onboard more developers, more people on board to it. And I would say even like on performance side, like on a smart contract platform, like you will have like so many solutions by the end of this year that if you're just building another generic smart contract platform, like EVM will like be comparable in performance, given like you see what Arith is doing, what Monad is doing, MegaETH is doing. But at the end of the day, is like the question is like, hey, like, can we do like some unique use cases with AltVMs, and do these use cases unlock like next 100x applications? And that's like what we're trying to ask and trying to build for.
Yeah, and I think this idea of the kind of the technical limitations being the reason for these kind of next-gen VMs coming to market, but the network effects, as you said, David, is kind of like the bigger issue at hand if you flip it for each of your environments and kind of projects. I'm thinking about how you guys plan to kind of access network effects from EVM and kind of broadly also solve this interoperability problem where interoperability providers have to make dev stretches to bring a bridge from fuel to Fluent to movement because they're different environments. How are you guys thinking about kind of accessing the network effects of EVM and building those interoperability solutions?
Maybe I can start. Like the way we think about it is that like EVM kind of like one or at least like gonna be the dominant player in a smart contract world, right? If you want to build a general smart contract application, like it's probably the best solution. So that's why like we're gonna have like our own EVM environment for people to come build on it, right? What we are trying to figure out is that like what use cases are not possible on general smart contract platform? What can I not do, let's say on MoveVM, on SVM, on EVM? And in that case, like that's what where we want to provide a unique environment where you can optimize for a specific use case. That's how you can achieve for an exchange, for example, like hundreds of thousand transactions a second, which is going to be a lot harder even like with a really performant EVM iterations or MoveVM or SVM iterations, right? So our answer to this is that like we want to onboard EVM developers, like all the EVM smart contract into a general EVM environment, but we also want to provide people like to build a application from 0 to 1 and build something that's not possible in EVM, MoveVM, SVM. And so you essentially don't need to fight over like, hey, build your smart contract on our platform. Like we're telling you, you can build something that's not possible like on EVM. Like, and that's the only place like where you can build what you want.
So the thesis is like users will know that they can get access to different apps on your execution environment and that's good enough?
So essentially like, they will have access to both, right? Like EVM platforms, like enabled, right? Yeah. But like we want to enable like essentially next iteration, and like let's say we build this app which is never going to be possible in EVM environment, and in that case like we can have like this unique value prop for people to come and avoid playing zero-sum games where you're trying to convince people rewrite your code in Move, rewrite your code in Rust or any other language, but instead build something from scratch, build something new that's not going to be there on any other chain.
So I think our version of that is, well, a little context, like we're at Fluent, we're building, I think I mentioned a first blended execution network. At the core of that is what we call a blended VM, which like for those more technical under the hood is just like a reduced version of like WebAssembly as our VM. But what we're doing with that I think is more interesting and where the blending comes in because we're like using some pre-compiles to facilitate like a number of different like apps from a number of different, traditionally a number of different VMs to deploy on our one kind of state machine. So EVM apps, SVM apps, and WASM. And so the way that we're approaching that problem within, for use cases that need to be in like kind of like one sandbox or want to be for whatever reason, you get much more expressivity. And I think the way, so you can copy paste some EVM apps over, but like the way you can kind of progressively start to like, differentiate from a lot of the other EVM, or mostly Solidity, so just because say Solidity apps, is maybe you would build, some type of app, like maybe you do like fork a Dex or something like that, but you innovate with it using some, some Rust libraries or some C++ libraries and enable, parts of that application that otherwise would either be like infeasible completely in an EVM environment because it's like very inefficient, or just like the, you know, kind of what we were saying before, just the rate of innovation, because there's just like that many more, you know, building blocks you basically pick off the shelf, and like that much, and that just fosters like more innovation. So that's kind of the way we see like meeting the market where it is right now, and kind of like helping people like progressively like build more and more interesting things, and you know, eventually to the point where, you know, maybe for net new use cases, people aren't, or people, new developers, maybe you are just building something in like JavaScript and using Rust smart contracts or something like that, using like the WASM part of the system. So that's kind of how we're approaching it. One thing to clarify though is like, even though we're saying, hey, we could blend all these environments together, like we're not trying to make the case that like that we're just going to be like one big fat roll up and everybody else can go home. Like that's not what we're thinking. We think it's kind of like just a better way to design execution environments. So we'd envision like many different like blended execution networks with all different types of trade-offs. So it's not like there are no trade-offs.
Yeah, I mean, is the original thing that we settled on was that the EVM was better with this go-to-market in terms of like network effects and like accessibility, but not as like strong, if you will, as some of these next-gen VMs on the technical side. But the first two answers so far have been all about the technicals and nothing about the network effects or the go-to-market. Like, is there a way that we're going to be able to kind of solve more for that weakness of the network effects? And I'm just picking a bone with you, but yeah.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, the way we're kind of approaching that at Movement is, like if you look at our DevNet right now, if you want to start building on Move, you can. We also have a DevNet specifically for EVM developers. So what we're trying to go for is like, if you want to, yes, you can bring your EVM apps here. And we've spoken to like a few EVM builders in that sense of like bringing them over to you know, our ecosystem or whatever. But to like really tap into Move VM itself as like a benefit for your app, we're telling people like, okay, you can do that, but like that's really there more for just like getting on the ecosystem, but at some point you can kind of like start moving over to the Move VM, right? So like giving that opening for folks to come in, use, you know, what Solidity smart contracts, that opening is there, inviting folks to the ecosystem, and I think that's a good way to tap into like some of the network effects and everything that we're talking about here. But ultimately you have to like kind of present what your benefits are, right? So in our case, it'd be like better security, you know, and you know, faster transactions, whatever, what have you. But I think taking a little bit of that phased approach, you catch some of those network effects, but you can start converting folks in that way.
Maybe we take a little more of like a extreme approach in that. Like I know, you know, with Fluent, with Movement, like you have EVM alongside more modern VMs. At Fuel, we had considered that. We decided that we really want developers to kind of like, we want to rip the Band-Aid off, and developers that want to build an ecosystem, like make them, you know, kind of learn Sway and, you know, build apps with the way that we think apps should be built on blockchains. And yeah, it's like it's certainly a tougher like onboarding process, but we wanted to kind of try to get people to realizing the benefits of kind of the architecture that we're building. And in terms of like the, you know, trying to tap into the network effects, I mean, it's always going to be hard to like try to fight against the network effects of all the tooling and everything in the ecosystem. So I think the best we can do is like just have like the late mover advantage of, you know, we've seen many different like toolkits come through on the EVM space. We've seen many different indexers, many different block explorers, things like that. You know, we don't need to kind of rerun that whole cycle. We can try to take the best of, you know, like trying to make CLIs that look like Foundry, trying to make indexers that take kind of the best things we see from different things in the indexing space. So again, it's certainly not easy and it's a lot of work to do, but that's, I think, the best that we can do at this point.
Just to like add a couple more points on that, just on this topic. Through just like there's more of like a startup like operator lens, right? Like, so if you're saying, all right, you know, I think both of our scenarios with Movement and Fluent, we're saying, okay, well, you know, you can maybe tap into the network effects by getting like Solidity dApps or existing apps, but it's like, okay, how do you, like, is there any more color you can offer on that? It's like, why would they, right? Is a good question, because you can also just deploy those same apps on EVM only chain. So it's like, okay, well, what's their interest? And I think at that point, there's a little bit of a dance between like just educating on like what's possible with these like new primitives in this new environment and getting people like excited enough that, number one, like that's going to be an interesting value prop for other devs, and this will be like a successful chain, just like purely a bet on like, okay, these guys are going to succeed. Like I should like get a jump on that. But also like, this is also like forward looking, so it takes a lot of, we end up speaking to people who like really get it, like from the Solidity and EVM side. But when they do, it's really cool because they're like, oh wow, you have these like net new apps that'll appear in this environment with this new successful chain, and I want to be able to access that. I don't get access to that on EVM only chains. So there's hopefully just offers a little bit more color on just like what that actual like go to market looks like.
Yeah, for sure. I think like wanted to add as well, like on the network effects outside of technicals, I think like our strategy is like figure out like how to onboard like new people to some different programming language, right? Our question is like, how can we make our environment the only place where you can do something, right? Because when we look back at Solana, everyone thinks about like how people onboarded people to Rust, but I was one of the first developers on Solana, and we came as a team to Solana because we saw that the Solana was the only place to build certain applications, right? That was the main selling point. And everyone was willing to learn Rust because of it, right? Not because like everyone was like preaching Rust is the next big thing, but because they told us, like you talk to founders, you talk to DevRel people, hey, you can build this only on Solana. Like the only possible on Solana meme is real, and that's what we are trying to achieve, right? Not to sell on like programming languages, not to sell on some small features, but tell people that certain products are only possible on our platform, and in our point of view, this is the best selling point, especially given like how crowded infrastructure space is.
Yeah, so the when apps question, which is now like a consensus take of we need more apps, less infra, which is I funnily kind of think that we still need to build more and more infra before we are ready for apps. But you guys are saying that that question might be solved or at least pushed forward away from the EVM much more so than within the constraints of the EVM.
In terms of how do we get apps?
Yeah.
I don't know. And that say like, how do we get apps? I think, first of all, I'm one of the people who will always like argue against like the people who are like, oh, crypto has no use case. I'm like, there's some really amazing stuff you can do with crypto. I live my life with my finances on crypto. I get paid with crypto. I spend money. I save money. All these things. I think that's amazing. And I think the superpower of crypto is like, especially in the DeFi context, is like being able to provide like the most efficient, open, permissionless markets to the world. One way I look at like what we're trying to do with Fuel is like make those markets even more efficient. You can do that by both lowering fees, trying to be more high performance, and by lowering latency, because that's how like centralized markets work in the world. Aside from kind of those things you can do on the infrastructure layer, I think one of the barriers to apps is outside of the infra space. It's bringing more assets on chain. If this is really a really great space for assets, for markets for assets, then some of this is just going to come from like the legal side, right? Like of how do we onboard? Is it whether it's real world assets, whether it's getting more companies to natively issue assets on chain equities, things like that. Those I think will the things that'll really bring kind of more usage on chain outside of just like people coming up with new ideas.
I do think, the reason why we're excited about what we're doing, and frankly what everyone on this like stage is doing with novel VM designs, is because I do really think that like the more like expressive you can like make the environment for developers or familiar, like expressive for like power users, and then just kind of like familiar for people coming in maybe with like languages they already know, or just like with more tools in the toolbox, like better things pop out, and that takes some time. And honestly, like you don't want to be complacent, but also like, I think this whole wave of like next gen VMs is probably within this past year. And so like we're seeing really exciting things like start to get built and exciting ideas. And so I'm still bullish on that. It's not like it's like when apps, but also like we're getting there. Like the work is being done, and like I'm sure you guys are all seeing some really cool use cases that couldn't be built on like EVM only environments or by EVM only like expertise. And I think it's just also a more complicated question because like there's so many other parts of like the stack and the education, just like all across the board, like we're like rewiring a lot of like just like we're basically building these stacks from the ground up. It's not like AI where it's coming in and just like building on top of the web stack. Like we're building full things. So you can have these amazing apps that people want to use, but then, you still make them use MetaMask. And you're like, shit, there's a little bottleneck there for user adoption. So it's just, there's hard problems, and we're at it.
It reminded me of yesterday, I forget the name, someone from Optimism was talking about their interoperability thing, and they were explained the whole, their interoperability thing. He's like, well, this is basically like UDP. So to say like, that's kind of like where we're at in terms of infrastructure. It's like, we're like, okay, guys, we finally invented UDP. I guess the Cosmos people will probably disagree and they say, no, IBC is UDP, but maybe TCP.
So that with each of these environments, there's like core reasons that you guys find out on the technical side that you have an edge on the EVM or potentially on each other in terms of how you guys are viewing your environments. What do you guys think from your perspective is the most important aspects of an execution environment that can scale like to a lot of users and high TPS, low latency? What is going to be the key features of an execution environment that will enable that?
Just like enabling better UX for people, right? So it's like if you look at like Solana versus Ethereum or whatever, like Solana has a better UX than Ethereum. It's a little bit easier to use, it's faster. So bringing like a lot of these AltVMs, we're just trying to bring better UX, better. Like if you want to, like this even goes back to the last question. If you want to bring apps, you have to just have a better user experience overall with like whatever tech you're using. So I think that's ultimately what we're all trying to unlock, just like that better, the ability for people to actually build a lot of these apps on, these new environments. So that, I think like everything that we say or do really just leads up and bubbles up to that.
Yeah, I think in general, how we try to think about it, right? Like, how can we enable new use cases? Like, how can we bring more users? And then try to ask our question, like, how can we make the sandbox of what developers can build much larger, right? I think, like, you look at progression, like, you have EVM, a bunch of first, like, layer ones. They have, like, 10 TPS, let's say, or whatnot. And they unclocked a ton of use cases. And you have, like, next-gen VMs. You have, like, Sui, Solana, Aptos. They provided another 100x, right? And our question is like, maybe by providing 100x more compute, 100x more TPS, like solving a lot of like key bottlenecks problems and really doing it like not 10x, not like 5% better, but really 100x. Like that's where you can bring developers and try to build completely new things, which people haven't imagined even building before, or making things that existed in the past like 100x better than they were before. So our question is like not only like on execution environment level, but even in hardware level, how we can like scale it like by next 2 magnitudes and see what we can do in this space. And like coming back to your previous question as well, right? Like in our opinion is that like, yes, like we don't think that infra is like at the end state. We haven't solved this problem yet, but we also feel like right now, like maybe we have like so much new resources, like maybe it's time to play in the sandbox and figure out like the next applications and the next unlocks. And it feels like throughout this like past 6 months, we haven't seen that many new net applications, which weren't possible like 4 years ago.
I'm going to give a little more like technical response to the question of, because I think you were asking like what properties does a next-gen VM have to have. A lot of our work, I feel recently has been exploring the state growth space. Because if you say, blockchains consume 3 resources, which is like DA/bandwidth, execution, like kind of basically CPU time, and state, your kind of persistent storage. We've, kind of recently like kind of flipped to the world where DA is like kind of cheap and abundant, like especially from a theoretical level. We now have 4844, we have Celestia that have already given us a ton, like probably more DA than we need, and both of them have like a long way to go, and we have all these other DA solutions. Execution, I think we're everyone's doing an awesome job at like innovating on execution, including in the EVM space. We're seeing more like parallelized EVMs and stuff like that, and that leaves kind of like state as the last bottleneck to address. And a lot of times when you improve execution, it actually like makes state a bigger problem. If you remove, the more you remove one bottleneck, the more something else becomes like the new bottleneck. So that I think is going to be a really key attribute of, next-gen virtual machines for blockchains. It's also something that's not as much of an issue kind of outside of the blockchain space, whereas like execution is generally like a standard computer science problem. A lot of, we've got decades of people trying to make programs run faster. So state is kind of a really interesting, like unique blockchain problem that still needs to be addressed, and that we're doing a lot of like research into trying to address.
So I think you had somewhat mentioned almost like what ways we're like almost like what maybe like competitive dynamics or something like that, and like I think there's like different dimensions to compete on, and like that's you guys are both doing amazing work on kind of like the speed and like performance dimension, and that's like phenomenal. I would say for Fluent, like our main, while clearly it's going to be like actually more performant than like EVM chains, but that's actually not the focal point of the project. It's more of like, I'll say the main dimension we're competing on is like, I'll say expressivity. Just like, I want to build a device, like when a dev steps into that sandbox, like I want to be able for them to just easily pick up dozens of programming languages, like millions of more libraries, and just in an easy way be able to just like, think of all of those as just like tools, and like just pick whatever best tool is good for best part of your app, and like I guess our thesis is that ends up with like much better apps, and so that's just what we're hyper focused on. There's some cool stuff that like a blended VM can do in like the area of parallelization stuff. We've actually just started researching like parallelizing kind of like the base layer WASM VM, and then being able to support like parallelize like EVM and some cool stuff on top. But for now, I really think for us, it's about developer experience.
Awesome. Is there any questions in the crowd? We have time for one question. Cool. Any takers? All right, my last question is, where is, I don't have a question.
I'll give the kumbaya moment. I think like what's super cool about like the modular space of this next gen VM space is like we do have a lot of different projects offering very different stuff. Like I'm excited about all the projects that I'm sitting here with, and I think different types of applications will benefit most from different types of VMs, different types of architectures, and that is I think what will like give us a lot of the new applications, the new use cases. Is that like you're not constrained to like trying to shoehorn every type of use case into the EVM, just like you probably wouldn't want to do every type of Web 2 application in JavaScript. So I think that's super cool.
Yeah, no, echo that. And I mean, just like the rate of experiment, the fact that like, we're building these as like rollups, and just like that rate of experimentation, like on top of things like Ethereum and Celestia is just like really cool to see, and I think ends up becoming just net better for, us just like smashing our heads against all these problems and competing with each other will end up like, I think pushing things forward in a cool way. So yeah, awesome stuff.
For sure.
Thanks, guys.